The call came just before dawn. By the time the city began to stretch awake, Detective Rachel Monroe was already standing outside the wrought iron gates of a colonial estate that had not changed its paint color in over 40 years. Retired Judge Harold Whitmore was found in his private study, seated upright in a leather-backed chair, hands resting naturally on the armrests. No visible signs of struggle, no shattered glass, no forced entry. The door had been locked from the inside. The housekeeper discovered him when he did not respond to the morning bell. On the desk in front of him lay a single open file. Case title, The State vs. Daniel Mercer. Closed 32 years ago. Acquittal. Rachel stepped inside the study slowly, absorbing the geometry of the room. Mahogany shelves climbed toward a ceiling painted in fading ivory. Framed commendations lined the walls. Photographs with governors, senators, a former chief justice. Power meant longevity. Longevity meant secrets. Time of death, she asked without turning. Between midnight and 2 in the morning, replied the uniform stationed near the doorway. Preliminary estimate. No immediate trauma visible. Rachel circled the desk. The judge's expression was neutral. Too neutral. No tension in the jaw. No sign of fear preserved in muscle memory. If he had seen death approach, he had not reacted to it. Or he had trusted it. Roland would later describe the room as theatrical in its stillness, as if someone had pressed pause on a scene meant to look peaceful. Rachel's eyes moved to the open file. The paper edges were brittle with age. Typed transcripts, witness statements, black and white crime scene photographs clipped together with rusting fasteners. Daniel Mercer, accused of the abduction and murder of a 19-year-old college student. Evidence circumstantial. Timeline inconsistent. A single eyewitness who later recanted. Acquitted after less than 4 hours of jury deliberation. Rachel leaned closer. A faint indentation marked the final page, as though something had once rested there for years and had recently been removed. "What's missing?" she asked quietly. The uniform frowned. "Missing." She traced the shape with her finger. A rectangle, approximately the size of an envelope. Something that sat here long enough to leave a pressure outline. "It's gone." Silence settled again. Rachel straightened and looked at the judge's right hand. There was something almost imperceptible beneath the fingernails. Not dirt. Not blood. Ink. Blue ink. She scanned the desk. A fountain pen lay uncapped near the file. Fresh ink pooled slightly at its nib. Had he been writing? There was no note. No suicide letter. No confession. No last-minute revelation. But the ink beneath his fingernails suggested contact. She turned his hand gently. A faint smudge marked the side of his index finger, as if he had pressed down hard against paper while signing something. "What about toxicology?" she asked. "Pending. Any history of heart issues? Minor arrhythmia? Nothing severe." Rachel studied his posture again. Too composed. The window behind the desk was sealed from the inside. Security system armed. No breach alarms triggered overnight. Locked room. Retired judge. Old murder file reopened. And something missing from the final page. She stepped back and surveyed the study once more. A grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner, its rhythm steady, unbothered. On the far wall hung a portrait taken during Whitmore's final year on the bench. The photographer had captured him mid-smile, confident, certain. Certain of what? Rachel approached the bookshelves. Legal volumes organized chronologically. She ran her finger along the spines until she reached the year of the Mercer trial. There, a gap. One volume slightly misaligned. She pulled it free. Inside the hollowed center of the book was nothing. But the cavity was recent. Dust patterns along the shelf indicated that the book had been removed and replaced within the last 24 hours. She closed it carefully. Someone had searched this room. Or someone had hidden something here for decades. The housekeeper waited downstairs, 70 years old, employed by Whitmore's family since before his retirement. Rachel descended the staircase slowly. "Did the judge mention the Mercer case recently?" she asked. The housekeeper hesitated. "He asked me to bring down old boxes from the attic 2 nights ago." "What kind of boxes?" "Court documents. Personal files." "Did he receive visitors?" "No one came inside." "But," she paused, "but, a car parked across the street yesterday afternoon. Dark sedan, Engine running for a long time. Did you see who was inside? No. The windows were tinted. Val nodded. Outside, crime scene technicians moved methodically across the manicured lawn. A neighbor approached cautiously. I heard sirens. The man said, Is it true? Yes, Rachel replied evenly. When was the last time you saw the judge? Yesterday evening. He was in his study. Lights on late. That wasn't unusual. Did you notice a vehicle parked nearby? The neighbor's expression shifted. There was a black car. I thought it belonged to a guest. Did you see anyone enter the house? No. Rachel thanked him and stepped aside. She glanced up at the second-floor study window. Locked from within. No disturbance. Locked rooms create illusions. They suggest impossibility. They invite assumptions of suicide or natural death. But Rachel had learned long ago that impossibility is often just choreography. Back inside, the medical examiner arrived. Preliminary external exam revealed no trauma. But when the examiner gently pressed along the judge's collarbone, a subtle discoloration appeared beneath the skin. Not a bruise. A pinpoint mark. Almost surgical imprecision. Rachel leaned closer. Injection site, she asked. Possibly. The examiner replied. Will confirm during autopsy. If so, the locked room shifted from mystery to message. Someone had been close enough to administer something. Close enough that the judge did not resist trusted. Or coerced without struggle. Rachel's phone vibrated. An analyst from records. Detective, I pulled archived coverage on the Mercer trial. The voice said, there were protests outside the courthouse after the acquittal. The victim's family accused the judge of bias. Bias how? Mercer's father was a major donor to Whitmore's re-election campaign. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. There it was. Money, influence, public outrage. Anything else? Daniel Mercer disappeared 6 months after the trial. Changed his name. Relocated. No confirmed address since. Alive. No official death record. Rachel ended the call. Upstairs, the grandfather clock continued its steady counting. 32 years. If the judge reopened the Mercer file after all this time, something triggered it. Guilt, threat, or revelation. Rachel returned to the study one final time before the body was removed. She studied the judge's face carefully. There was something almost serene about it. Not fear, not panic. Acceptance. Her eyes drifted once more to the open case file. The last page contained a handwritten notation dated 3 days ago. 3 words. Review transcript discrepancy. Nothing more, no explanation. Just the acknowledgement that something in the original trial did not align. Rachel stepped back as the body was lifted carefully onto a stretcher. The room felt emptier immediately, but the silence felt heavier. She glanced again at the faint rectangular imprint on the desk. Whatever had rested there had mattered, and someone had taken it before dawn. As the stretcher moved down the hallway, Rachel stood alone in the study for a moment longer. Justice can expire quietly. It can be buried beneath procedure and applause. But sometimes it waits. Waits decades. And then it knocks. Rachel looked toward the hollowed book on the shelf. Someone had been here recently. Someone who knew exactly what to remove. The question was not whether Judge Whitmore died of natural causes. The question was whether the past had finally collected its debt. And if so, who came to collect? If you follow evidence over assumptions, subscribe now. And tell me in the comments, based on what you've heard so far, does the timeline feel intentional or accidental? The autopsy began at 8 in the morning. Rachel stood behind the glass partition, arms folded, eyes fixed on the stainless steel table where Judge Harold Whitmore now lay beneath clinical lighting that stripped away prestige and ceremony. Death made everyone equal. The medical examiner worked methodically. External confirmation first. No defensive wounds. No contusions along the forearms. No fractures in the knuckles. Fingernails intact aside from the faint blue ink residue already documented. When the scalpel traced a line beneath the clavicle, the truth surfaced quickly. There it was. A precise puncture mark, clean, intentional, positioned just above the subclavian vein. Injection. The examiner confirmed. Very fine gauge needle. Minimal tissue trauma. Rachel exhaled slowly. Estimated time. Consistent with our original window. Midnight to 2. Substance. Preliminary toxicology is already showing something unusual. The examiner stepped aside, allowing the toxicology technician to hold up a digital readout. Succinylcholine, the technician said. Fast-acting paralytic. Common in surgical settings. Causes respiratory arrest. Metabolizes quickly. Rachel's jaw tightened. With proper dosage, the examiner added, it would render him conscious but unable to move. Unable to speak. Unable to breathe. Locked room. No struggle. Serene expression. He would have been awake. Aware. But immobilized. Would there have been pain? Rachel asked. Not physical pain, but awareness without control. That's psychological suffocation. Rachel nodded once. This was not a sudden collapse. This was stage composure. Anything else? The examiner hesitated. There are minor abrasions inside the left wrist. Very faint. Like something restrained him briefly. Restraints. Possibly removed before death. Or during. Rachel turned away from the glass. If someone had injected him, they had been close. Close enough to restrain. Close enough to control the room without chaos. Which meant entry was voluntary. Or trust was weaponized. Back at the precinct, the Mercer file was spread across the conference table. Roland's narration would later describe the documents as artifacts from a different legal era. Typewritten testimonies, grainy photographs, margins annotated in ink that had faded into soft gray. Rachel scanned the original indictment. Daniel Mercer, 23 at the time of arrest, accused of abducting 19-year-old Elise Harmon outside her campus dormitory. Body recovered 3 days later near an abandoned rail yard. Cause of death: blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. Mercer claimed he had never met her. Prosecution leaned heavily on one eyewitness, a gas station attendant, who claimed he saw Mercer arguing with the victim hours before she disappeared. That testimony had fractured during cross-examination. The attendant admitted to drinking that night. Timeline inconsistencies surfaced. Reasonable doubt expanded. Acquittal. But Rachel's focus rested on the handwritten note added 3 days ago by Judge Whitmore. Review transcript discrepancy. She pulled the archived trial transcript and flipped to the cross-examination of the eyewitness. Page after page of procedural exchange. Then she found it. A brief sidebar discussion that was sealed from public record. The transcript referenced it only as off-record judicial consultation. No summary, no detail. Rachel looked up. Pull the sealed sidebar. She told records. It's restricted. The clerk replied. Court order. Wes. Rachel reached for her phone. Within 2 hours, she secured authorization to access the sealed portion. When the digital file arrived, she opened it alone. The sidebar conversation revealed something subtle but explosive. The prosecutor had attempted to introduce late, discovered fiber evidence linking Mercer's vehicle to the victim's clothing. The defense objected on procedural grounds, claiming late disclosure. Judge Whitmore ruled the evidence inadmissible. Reason: chain of custody irregularities. But the sealed transcript contained a second exchange not reflected in the official ruling. The prosecutor had stated, quietly, "We have confirmation from State Lab that the fibers are a match beyond reasonable probability." Whitmore's response: "Without documented custody, I will not risk appellate reversal." The defense attorney added, "Your Honor, we remind the court of the upcoming election season." Pause. Then Whitmore: "Objection sustained. Evidence excluded." Rachel leaned back slowly. Election season. Campaign funding. Mercer's father was a donor. The fiber evidence never reached the jury. Rachel's phone buzzed again. Forensics update. Detective. The voice said, "We found trace adhesive residue on the desk surface where that rectangular imprint was located." Adhesive. Yes. Likely from the back of an envelope. Something sealed there for a long time. What kind of envelope? Old stock. Paper fiber consistent with early 1990s. So the judge had kept something hidden in plain sight for over 3 decades. An envelope adhered to the final page of the Mercer file. Removed before dawn. She stood and paced slowly. If Whitmore reopened the file 3 days ago, he likely removed the envelope himself. Or someone forced him to retrieve it. Track financial transfers tied to Mercer's father around the year of the trial. She instructed the analyst. Within the hour, results came back. A significant donation was made to Whitmore's re-election campaign 2 weeks before the acquittal. Legal, but politically convenient. Rachel stared at the screen. Was Whitmore preparing to expose himself? Or was someone confronting him with proof? She pulled Daniel Mercer's updated background file. After the acquittal, Mercer legally changed his name to Daniel Moore, relocated across state lines, minimal public footprint. Then something unexpected surfaced. 3 months ago, a private limited liability corporation was registered under a holding group connected to Moore. That corporation purchased a property less than 5 miles from Whitmore's estate. Rachel's pulse slowed. Pull surveillance from surrounding streets last night, she ordered. Traffic cameras within a half-mile radius revealed a dark sedan entering the neighborhood at 11:38 p.m., license plate partially obscured by glare. But frame enhancement produced enough clarity to identify the registered owner. Daniel Moore, formerly Daniel Mercer, alive, and recently returned. Rachel leaned back in her chair. If Mercer had returned, why now? Revenge. Blackmail. Closure. She returned to the autopsy findings. Succinylcholine is not easily obtained without medical access. She checked Mercer's occupational history. After relocation, he completed a nursing certification. Worked briefly in outpatient surgical facilities. Access. Knowledge. Opportunity. But would he risk direct confrontation after 32 years? She replayed the sequence in her mind. Whitmore revisits the file. Whitmore notes transcript discrepancy. Whitmore possibly retrieves hidden envelope. Mercer returns to the area. A dark sedan idles outside the estate. Injection administered. Envelope missing. Rachel's phone vibrated again. Detective. Forensics said. We found something else. What? Partial latent print on the fountain pen. Belongs to the judge. No. Pause. It matches Daniel Moore. Silence filled Rachel's office. If Mercer touched the pen, he had been inside the study, which meant entry was granted. Whitmore opened the door. No forced entry. No alarms triggered. They had spoken. Rachel imagined the scene. 2 men separated by decades. One who walked free. One who carried the weight of that decision. What would be said in that room? Did Mercer accuse him? Did Whitmore confess? Or did they negotiate? She stood abruptly. Ring Moore in, she ordered. Officers located him at the recently purchased property, a renovated townhouse registered under the holding corporation. He did not resist. He did not request a lawyer immediately. He did not appear surprised. Daniel Moore was older now, hair thinner, face marked by time, but his posture remained composed. Rachel sat across from him in the interrogation room. You visited Judge Whitmore last night, she said. Yes. Why? He called me. Rachel held his gaze steady. He reopened the Mercer case, she said. Moore nodded slowly. He said there was something he needed to correct. Correct what? Moore's eyes flickered briefly. He told me he made a mistake. Rachel waited. What kind of mistake? She asked. Moore's jaw tightened. He said the fiber evidence should have been admitted. Silence settled between them. Rachel leaned forward. And he said he kept proof. Proof of what? Moore's expression shifted. That someone pressured him. Rachel's voice lowered. Who? Moore hesitated. Then he answered. My father. The room felt smaller suddenly. Your father pressured a judge? Rachel asked. He funded his campaign. He met him privately before the ruling. And you? I didn't know at the time. Rachel studied him carefully. Why return now? My father died last year. I found letters in his safe. Correspondence with Whitmore. Blackmail. Moore nodded once. He kept evidence of their arrangement. The fiber report. Copies. Rachel's pulse sharpened. The envelope on the desk, she said quietly. Moore's eyes shifted. He showed it to me. And where is it now? Moore exhaled slowly. He took it back before I left. You're saying you did not remove it? No. Rachel's stare hardened. Your fingerprint is on his pen. He asked me to sign something. What? A statement. What kind of statement? Moore swallowed. A declaration that I knew about my father's involvement, that I was complicit in silence. Rachel leaned back. So he wanted to clear his conscience. Wes? And you signed it? Wes? Then what happened? Moore's voice lowered. He said he would turn everything over to the state prosecutor in the morning. And I left. Nelev. Less. Rachel watched for micro-expressions. Any twitch. Any fracture. None appeared. If you injected him, she said calmly, you would know how to avoid detection. I didn't. Moore replied evenly. Rachel stood slowly. Your car was parked outside for over an hour. I was waiting. For what? For him to decide. Decide what? Whether he would finally tell the truth. Silence lingered. Rachel stepped out of the interrogation room and closed the door behind her. If Moore was telling the truth, someone else entered after he left, which meant the envelope was worth killing for. She reviewed the estate's security logs again. Front door disarmed at 11:20 p.m. Rearmed at 1:43 a.m. Moore claimed he left just after midnight, which left a gap. 40 minutes unaccounted for. Rachel returned to the study photographs. Something about the grandfather clock bothered her. She zoomed in on the image. At 11:45 p.m., the pendulum was centered. In the crime scene photo taken at 6 a.m., it was still centered. The clock had stopped. She checked maintenance records. The clock was mechanical. It required manual winding every 48 hours. Last wound 2 days ago. If it stopped at 11:45, someone tampered with it. Rachel's eyes sharpened. She enlarged the photograph further. At the base of the clock was a faint scuff mark on the hardwood floor. Recent. As if it had been moved. She turned to forensics. Rauer examined the grandfather clock, she ordered. Hours later, the call came. Detective. The technician said, there's a concealed compartment behind the clock casing. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. And it's empty. The envelope had not been kept in the book. It had been hidden in the clock, which meant Whitmore retrieved it last night, showed it to Moore, then replaced it, and someone else knew exactly where to find it. The investigation had shifted. This was no longer about an acquittal. It was about suppressed evidence, and someone willing to ensure it stayed buried. Rachel looked through the interrogation window at Daniel Moore. If he did not remove the envelope, then someone else entered that locked study after midnight. Someone Whitmore trusted enough to open the door. Again, the question was no longer whether justice failed 32 years ago. The question now was, who else had a stake in keeping it that way? The estate security system was older than it looked, externally modern, internally patched and updated across decades. Rachel sat beside the digital forensics analyst as they reconstructed the alarm logs frame by frame. Front door disarmed at 11:20 p.m., rearmed at 12:07 a.m., then disarmed again at 12:58 a.m., rearmed at 1:43 a.m. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Moore said he left just after midnight, she said. He would have triggered the first rearm. The analyst replied, which means the second disarm was someone else. Wes. No forced entry recorded. None. Any secondary access points. Study window was sealed. No glass disturbance. Back door never opened, so whoever entered used the front door code. The analyst nodded. Only 3 people had active codes, he said. Judge Whitmore, the housekeeper, and, he hesitated, and, the estate's former security consultant. Rachel turned her head slowly. Former. Yes. Contract ended 5 years ago, but the code authorization file shows his credentials were never fully revoked. Name. Call. Thomas Greeley. Rachel recognized it immediately. Greeley had been the lead investigator on the Mercer case 32 years earlier. Now retired. Now, with dormant access to the judge's home, she stood without another word. Thomas Greeley lived alone in a modest ranch house 20 miles outside the city. The yard was unkempt, curtains drawn despite mid-morning sun. His car sat in the driveway. Rachel knocked once. The door opened after several seconds. Greeley was older than she expected, shoulders curved inward, eyes alert. Detective, he said evenly. I wondered how long it would take. You knew he'd come. I watched the news. Rachel studied his face. Your security credentials were used at 12:58 this morning, she said. Greeley did not immediately respond. I haven't accessed that system in years, he said. The logs disagree. He stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the house was orderly. Too orderly. Papers stacked with deliberate alignment. Photographs framed precisely. Rachel remained standing. You investigated the Mercer case, she said.
Yes.
You testified regarding fiber evidence. Yes. You were present during the sidebar discussion. Greeley's jaw shifted slightly. I was. Did you believe Mercer was guilty? I believed the evidence pointed strongly in that direction. Strongly. The fibers matched his vehicle upholstery. The probability margin was extremely narrow, and the evidence was excluded. Less. Rachel watched him carefully. Did you pressure the judge to reconsider? No. Did you confront him recently? Greeley's eyes flickered for the first time. He called me 3 days ago, he said quietly. Why? He said he wanted to revisit the case. Said something had been weighing on him. And he asked if I still had copies of the original lab reports. Did you? Yes. Rachel's pulse steadied. Where are they now? Greeley gestured toward a filing cabinet. Still here. Rachel approached it slowly. Inside were meticulously preserved records, yellowed but intact. She scanned the fiber analysis. Match probability exceeding 99% within material composition sample. The chain of custody irregularity cited during trial appeared procedural. A labeling discrepancy during transfer between technicians. Correctable. Not invalidating. Rachel turned. Did you go to Whitmore's house last night?
No.
Your access code was used. Greeley frowned. I didn't enter that house. Where were you between midnight and 2? Home. Anyone who can confirm? No. Rachel stepped closer. Judge Whitmore was injected with succinylcholine. Greeley did not flinch. He was conscious but paralyzed. A pause. That's a surgical agent. Greeley said calmly. Yes. Not something I would have access to. You were law enforcement, not medical. Rachel studied him. His breathing remained even. Posture steady. No tremor in hands. If Whitmore was preparing to expose misconduct, she said quietly, who would that threaten? Greeley looked at her directly. The reputation of the court. The credibility of the prosecutor. The political donors tied to that campaign. And you. My career ended clean. I retired with honors. But the Mercer acquittal was considered your failure. Silence. That case followed me, he admitted. Rachel leaned in. If the envelope contained proof of suppressed evidence, and that proof became public, it would reopen the case. Greeley finished. Yes. And if Mercer were retried, he could face conviction. Greeley's eyes sharpened slightly. So you think I killed a judge to protect the possibility of justice? I think someone removed an envelope from Bermuda grandfather clock after midnight. Rachel held his gaze. And your credentials were used to enter the house during that window. Greeley crossed his arms slowly. My code was used, he said. It wasn't by me. Rachel let the silence expand. You understand how this looks. I do. Who else would know your code? Greeley hesitated. It was shared once. When? During system installation. With whom? The security technician who programmed the system. Name? Michael Reeves. Rachel committed it to memory. Still in business. Last I heard. Rachel closed the cabinet. If you're lying, she said evenly, I will find out. I expect you will. Oh, back at the precinct, Rachel pulled Michael Reeves' background file. Private security contractor, a established firm, installed Whitmore's upgraded alarm system 15 years ago. Still active, she called. Reeves answered on the second ring. Yes. This is Detective Monroe. We need to speak. About the judge. Yes. He exhaled audibly. I was afraid of that. Reeves' office was modern. Glass walls. Surveillance monitors lining one side. Rachel sat across from him. Did you access Judge Whitmore's alarm system last night? She asked. No. Did you ever retain access credentials after installation? For maintenance, yes. But remote access only. Physical entry codes belong to homeowners. Did you ever provide Thomas Greeley's credentials to anyone? No. Rachel slid a printed log across the table. 12:50, 8 a.m. Access granted. Code identification Greeley. Reeves frowned. That's impossible. Why? Because his credentials should have expired automatically when his contract ended. It didn't. Reeves leaned back. Then that's my oversight, Bach. Or intentional. He shook his head. I had no reason to tamper with that system. Rachel studied the monitors behind him. Live feeds from multiple client properties. Did Whitmore contact you recently? Yes. When? 2 days ago. Why? He asked whether the alarm system logged internal movements. Does it? Only entry and exit points. What did he say? He sounded nervous. Nervous how? Like he expected someone. Rachel felt the pattern tightening. Did he ask about code deletions? Reeves hesitated. Yes. When? Yesterday afternoon. What did you tell him? That removing old credentials would require manual update. Did you do it? No. He said he would handle it later. Rachel leaned back. So Whitmore knew Greeley's code remained active, and he had considered deleting it, but didn't. Why? Trust, leverage, or trap? Rachel stood. One more question, she said. If someone used Greeley's code last night, could they have spoofed it? Reeves shook his head slowly. Not without inside access. Meaning, someone with administrative privileges. Who has that? Reeves paused. I do. Silence settled. And anyone else? Rachel pressed. No. Rachel held his gaze. Then either Greeley entered the house, or someone used your administrative credentials to frame him. Reeves swallowed. That would require physical access to my system. Rachel's eyes moved slowly to the surveillance monitors again. Do you keep backups? Yes. Pull last night's internal office feed. He hesitated only briefly before complying. They fast-forwarded to midnight. The office was dark, empty, until, at 12:42 a.m., a shadow moved across the far camera. Reeves leaned closer. That's impossible, he whispered. The footage showed someone entering through the back door. Face obscured by hood, they moved directly toward the main console. At 12:56 a.m., the alarm system dashboard lit up. At 12:58 a.m., Whitmore's home registered disarm. Rachel watched in silence. The figure moved with familiarity. No hesitation. They navigated menu sufficiently. At 1:03 a.m. they exited. Who else has keys to this office? She asked. Reeves stared at the screen. My assistant. Name. Laura Bennett. Rachel felt something shift. Laura Bennett. She recognized the name, assistant district attorney, assigned as junior prosecutor on the Mercer case 3 decades ago. Now senior partner in a private firm. Rachel turned slowly. Where is she now? Reeves swallowed. I don't know. Rachel's mind aligned the pieces. Junior prosecutor in Mercer trial. Career potentially damaged by the acquittal. Access to legal circles. Connection to Whitmore. Connection to security contractor through employment. If Whitmore intended to expose suppressed evidence, it would implicate not only himself, but the prosecution team, including Laura Bennett. Rachel closed the video playback. Get me her address, she said. As she stepped out into the hallway, the narrative shifted again. This was no longer a simple revenge theory. It was containment. If Whitmore had planned to confess to suppressing critical fiber evidence, and if that confession implicated both political donors and prosecutorial misconduct, then someone with more to lose than Mercer had acted. The second disarm at 12:58 a.m., the removed envelope, the injection delivered with surgical precision. Someone entered calmly, removed the evidence, ensured silence, and left without disturbing the staged piece. Rachel paused before entering the elevator. If Laura Bennett used Reeves' system to spoof Greeley's code, she intended to frame the original investigator, to bury the past under a familiar scapegoat. But one detail still unsettled Rachel. Moore's fingerprint on the fountain pen, the signed declaration. If Whitmore forced Moore to acknowledge complicity, then Moore's life would collapse if the envelope surfaced, which meant 3 people had motive. Moore, Greeley, Bennett, and only one had just appeared on camera accessing the alarm system remotely. Rachel pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open. If Laura Bennett believed 30 2 years of silence guaranteed safety. She miscalculated. Because buried evidence does not decay. It waits. And someone had finally decided to dig. Laura Bennett lived in a gated community overlooking the river. Security booth. Surveillance cameras. Guarded entry. The kind of controlled access that signaled both wealth and caution. Rachel arrived just before sunset. The guard confirmed Bennett was home. When the door opened, Laura Bennett appeared composed. Mid-60s. Tailored blouse. Hair precisely styled. The discipline of a career that were evident even in posture. Detective Monroe, she said evenly. I expected someone would come. May we speak inside? Bennett stepped aside without hesitation. The interior was minimalist. Neutral tones. Abstract artwork. No visible clutter. Rachel remained standing. You were the junior prosecutor on the Mercer case, she said. Yes. You accessed Michael Reeves' security office at 12:42 a.m. last night. A pause. Bennett did not feign confusion. You have footage, she said calmly. Yes. She nodded once. I assumed you might. Why? Because I know how investigations work. Rachel watched her carefully. Why were you at Reeves' office? To confirm something. What? What? That Thomas Greeley's access code was still active. Rachel's eyes narrowed. You knew it was. Wes. How? Judge Whitmore told me. Rachel did not move. Who called you? 3 days ago. Why? Bennett walked toward the kitchen island slowly, resting her fingertips lightly against the marble surface. He said he was revisiting Mercer, and said he intended to submit a statement acknowledging judicial error. Rachel's pulse steadied. Did he say error or misconduct? He said he excluded evidence he now believed should have been admitted because of political pressure. Bennett's gaze hardened slightly. He did not use those words, but that was the implication. Yes. Rachel took a step closer, and that admission would implicate you. Bennett's jaw tightened. It would call into question the integrity of the prosecution. And your career. My career is nearly over. But your reputation remains. Silence lingered. You accessed the alarm system, Rachel said quietly. Then Greeley's code was used to enter Whitmore's house. Yes. Did you enter the house? No. Did you kill him? No. Rachel held her gaze. You spoofed Greeley's code to frame him. Bennett did not respond immediately. I wanted to know if his access was still viable, she said carefully. That's not an answer. It's the truth. Rachel paced slowly. If Whitmore exposed suppressed evidence, the Mercer case could be reopened. Wes. If reopened, Mercer could be retried. Yes. If retried, the original exclusion would be examined. Yes. And if examined, your conduct would be scrutinized. Bennett's voice remained steady. I followed procedure. Did you? Rachel pressed. Bennett's eyes flickered for the first time. There are moments in a courtroom, she said, where discretion determines outcome. Discretion or strategy? Both. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Did you encourage Whitmore to exclude the fiber evidence? I objected on procedural grounds. Did you mention election season? Bennett's silence answered more than words. Rachel let it stretch. You went to Reeves' office after midnight. She continued. Why not earlier? Because I didn't want my access logged during business hours. So you were hiding your presence. Less. Dar. From whom? From anyone who might look. Rachel's voice dropped lower. Whitmore died between midnight and 2. I know. You were in a position to manipulate entry logs. Yes. Did you coordinate with anyone? No. Rachel stepped back, studying her. Where were you between 12:58 and 1:43 a.m., driving home? GPS confirms. Yes. Well, verify. Please do. Rachel's mind moved through the timeline. Moore leaves around midnight. Alarm reared at 12:07. At 12:42, Bennett enters Reeves' office. At 12:58, Whitmore's alarm disarmed using Greeley's code. At 1:43, rearmed, which meant someone physically entered during that 45-minute window. Who had access to Whitmore's front door key? Rachel asked. No one. Bennett replied. Hay relied solely on codes. Did he ever share his personal code with you? No. Rachel's gaze sharpened. Did you know about the envelope hidden behind the grandfather clock? Bennett's composure fractured. Briefly, I suspected he kept something. What? Copies of lab confirmations. Did you ever see them? No, but you believed they existed. Less. Why? Because he told me years ago that he retained documents as leverage. Rachel's breath slowed. Leverage against whom? Bennett's voice lowered. Against Daniel Mercer's father. And you. Never threatened me, but if he confessed, you would be implicated. Less. Rachel let the silence breathe. If you didn't enter the house, she said evenly, then someone else did. Wes. Ooh. Bennett met her eyes directly. Daniel Moore. Rachel's expression did not change. Why? Because he had more to lose than anyone. Rachel folded her arms. Explain. If Whitmore forced him to sign a statement acknowledging knowledge of his father's interference. Bennett said, that makes Moore complicit. In what? In obstruction. In benefiting from a compromised verdict. And if the envelope surfaced, he would face retrial, and possibly charges tied to concealment. Rachel studied her. So you're suggesting Moore returned after leaving?
Yes.
And used Greeley's spoofed code?
Yes.
Convenient. Etta lines. Rachel moved toward the window. The river reflected fading sunlight in fractured gold patterns. You're very calm, Rachel said quietly. I've spent 40 years in courtrooms. Did you ever regret the Mercer acquittal? Bennett hesitated. Yes. Why? Because I believe he was guilty. And now, I still do. Rachel turned slowly. Guilt is not proof. No. Bennett agreed. But proof was available. And excluded. Yes. Rachel's eyes held hers. Did you love your career more than justice? Bennett's expression hardened. That's an unfair question. Is it? Silence. Rachel stepped toward the door. We'll verify your GPS, she said. You should. And we'll confirm Moore's movements. Yes. As Rachel reached the threshold, Bennett spoke again. Detective. Rachel paused. If Whitmore intended to confess, he destroyed decades of stability. Stability for whom? Rachel asked without turning. For the system. Rachel left without replying. Back in her vehicle, Rachel reviewed Moore's statement again. He claimed he left just after midnight. But cell tower pings placed his phone within a half-mile radius until 1:27 a.m. He did not drive directly home. He circled the neighborhood. Waiting. For what? Rachel's phone vibrated. Forensics update. Detective, the technician said, would process trace from the injection site. Yes. Microscopic fiber adhered to the puncture wound. Rachel's mind sharpened. What kind? Latex blend. Medical gloves. Likely. Any unique composition. Unusual manufacturing marker. Specific polymer additive used in only a few brands. Trace it. Minutes later, confirmation arrived. The additive corresponded to a brand distributed primarily through hospital supply contracts, including facilities where Daniel Moore once worked. Rachel exhaled slowly. Motive. Means. Opportunity. But something still unsettled her. If Moore injected Whitmore, why remove the envelope? To destroy evidence. Yes. But if Bennett accessed the alarm system first, was Moore aware the code was spoofed? Or did he believe he entered unnoticed? Rachel replayed the timeline in her mind again. Moore inside before midnight. Whitmore alive. Moore leaves. Bennett accesses Reeves' system. Alarm disarmed at 12:58. Moore's phone still nearby. Did Moore return? Or did someone else exploit Bennett's manipulation to enter? Rachel's phone buzzed again. Detective. Forensics said. Where recovered partial print from the grandfather clock casing. Rachel's heartbeat steadied. And it's Daniel Moore's. Silence filled the car. Moore had handled the clock, which meant he knew where the envelope was hidden. He had seen it. Possibly retrieved it. Possibly replaced it. Or removed it after Bennett spoofed the code. Rachel looked toward the river again. 3 actors. 1 confession pending. 1 envelope missing. One dead judge. She started the engine. If Moore returned after midnight, he had 45 minutes inside that house. 45 minutes to inject. 45 minutes to retrieve. 45 minutes to silence a man preparing to undo a verdict. Rachel tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Justice delayed for 32 years. Corrected in less than 1 hour. The question now was not who had motive. It was who made the final decision, and whether that decision was driven by fear or by the certainty that truth would finally surface. Daniel Moore requested a second interview. That, more than anything, shifted the rhythm of the investigation. Rachel entered the interrogation room alone this time. No secondary observer, no visible file. Just a recorder placed quietly between them. Moore looked different. Less composed, not panicked, but heavier, like someone who had spent the night calculating outcomes. You said you wanted to clarify something? Rachel began. Yes. What? Moore inhaled slowly. I went back. Rachel did not react outwardly. What time? A little before 1. Why? Because I realized what signing that statement meant, which was that if he submitted it, I'd be implicated. In what way? In benefiting from suppressed evidence. Rachel leaned back slightly. And that concerned you? Wes. So you returned. Les. How did you get inside? He gave me the code earlier. Not Greeley's code. No. His personal code. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Then why was Greeley's code used at 12:58? Moore hesitated. I don't know. That's not credible. It's the truth. Rachel let the silence press in. When you returned, she said calmly, was the door locked? Yes. And you entered using his personal code? Yes. What did you find? He was still in the study. Alive? Yes. What was he doing? Sitting at the desk. Envelope present. Moore swallowed.
Yes.
Where? On the desk. The rectangular imprint. Yes. Rachel's gaze sharpened. What happened next? I told him he couldn't send that statement. And he said he had to. Why? Because he'd been wrong. Rachel studied his face closely. He said the fiber evidence would have convicted you? Yes. Did he say he was pressured? Yes. By your father? Yes. Did you deny knowing? I told him I found out only after my father died. And did he believe you? Moore's voice lowered. I don't know. Rachel leaned forward. When did the argument escalate? Moore's eyes flickered. It didn't. You expect me to believe that? He was calm? And you? I was scared. Of prison. Of losing the life I built. Rachel's tone hardened slightly. Did you inject him? Moore's jaw clenched. Yes. The word hung in the room. Rachel did not blink. Why? Because he wouldn't stop. Stop what? Fixing the past. Silence. You had access to succinylcholine, Rachel said evenly. Yes. You wore gloves. Wes. You restrained him briefly. Les. You injected him above the clavicle. Wes. Rachel allowed the weight of it to settle. He was conscious. She said, yes. Did he know what you were doing? Les. Did he say anything? Moore's eyes grew distant. He said, it should have happened differently. Rachel remained still, and then I waited for him to die. Yes. Why remove the envelope? Because it would reopen everything. Where is it? Moore hesitated. Destroyed? How? Burned. Where? In a fire pit behind my townhouse. Rachel watched for deception. None obvious. But there's something that doesn't fit, she said quietly. Moore's eyes lifted. The alarm log shows Greeley's code was used. I don't know anything about that. Your fingerprint was on the grandfather clock casing. I touched it when he showed me the hiding place. And the second disarm. I entered using his personal code, not Greeley's. Rachel let the contradiction sit. If you used his personal code, she said slowly, why would the system log Greeley's credential? Moore looked confused. I didn't. Rachel studied him for several long seconds. What time did you leave? About 1:40? The system reamed at 1:43. That sounds right. So you were still inside when Greeley's code was logged. Moore's breathing shifted. I didn't use that code. Rachel stood slowly. There's something else, she said. What? The grandfather clock stopped at 11:45. Moore frowned. I don't know anything about that. 8 was manually halted. I didn't touch it. Rachel moved toward the door. You confessed to murder, she said evenly. Yes. But parts of your timeline don't align with the physical evidence. Moore's composure cracked slightly. I killed him, he said again. Rachel paused at the threshold. Did you kill him? She asked quietly. Because you were guilty. Or because you were innocent. Moore stared at her. I was acquitted. That wasn't my question. Silence. Rachel left the room. Outside, Roland would later describe the moment as the pivot point. A confession simplifies headlines, but it complicates truth. Rachel stood in the hallway reviewing everything. Moore admits injection. Moore admits destroying the envelope. Moore confirms restraint. Physical evidence supports injection method. But the alarm log discrepancy remains, and Bennett's midnight system access remains. Rachel requested immediate forensic retrieval from Moore's property. Officers returned within hours. In the backyard fire pit, charred paper fragments were recovered. Partial letterhead visible. State laboratory watermark. But one fragment caught Rachel's attention. It bore not fiber analysis, but bank routing details. Campaign contribution receipt. Whitmore's account. Mercer's father. Payment amount circled in ink. Rachel's pulse steadied. The envelope did not contain only lab confirmation. It contained proof of financial transfer. Direct linkage. Judicial compromise documented. If Moore destroyed that, he protected more than himself. He protected the system's FI aid. Rachel returned to Moore's interview room. You burned the lab report, she said. Yes. And the financial receipt. Moore's eyes widened slightly. What receipt? The campaign transfer. Silence. I didn't see that, he said. Rachel watched carefully. You're certain? Yes. Rachel leaned in. Then someone else removed it. Moore shook his head slowly. The envelope only had the lab report. You're wrong. No. Rachel's mind sharpened. If the receipt fragment was recovered from his fire pit, it had been in the envelope. Unless someone planted it. She replayed Bennett's words. Whitmore retained documents as leverage against Mercer's father. If Bennett feared exposure, she had motive to remove evidence linking political money, but Moore admitted burning the envelope. Unless he burned only what he believed was inside. Rachel's phone vibrated. Forensics update. Detective. The technician said, the latex polymer marker from the injection site matches a batch distributed to a surgical supply warehouse. Yes. That warehouse supplies a private outpatient clinic. Which one? The technician named it. Rachel recognized it instantly. Laura Bennett's husband served on the board of that clinic. Rachel's breathing slowed. Moore had access through past employment, but Bennett had indirect access through governance. 2 possible sources. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Confessions can be strategic, protective, or incomplete. She reopened them with clarity. Moore admitted murder quickly, too quickly, without bargaining, without lawyer, as if expecting inevitability. Rachel walked back into the interrogation room one final time. You confessed, she said calmly. Yes. Why now? Because you would prove it. Would I? Yes. Rachel studied him carefully. If I told you someone else entered that house before you returned. Moore looked up sharply. I'd say you're wrong. If I told you someone tampered with the alarm logs before midnight. That's impossible. Is it? Moore's breathing quickened slightly. You're trying to unsettle me. No. Rachel said evenly. I'm trying to determine whether you're protecting someone. Silence filled the room. Rachel leaned closer. Did you know Laura Bennett visited Reeves' office? Moore's eyes flickered. No. Did you know Greeley's code was active? No. Rachel held his gaze. If Bennett manipulated the alarm log before you returned, it creates a different sequence. Moore said nothing. Did you speak to her recently? Rachel pressed. No. Rachel stepped back. Either Moore was the sole architect, or he was part of a chain reaction triggered by Whitmore's decision to confess. One man pressured by a donor, one prosecutor protecting a verdict, one acquitted defendant afraid of retrial, all orbiting the same suppressed evidence. Rachel exited the room slowly. The case was solvable, but not clean. Moore confessed to murder. Evidence supports injection. Yet the financial receipt fragment suggests broader corruption. And Bennett's midnight system access cannot be dismissed. Rachel looked through the observation glass at Moore once more. Justice delayed. Justice manipulated. Justice rewritten. But justice never erased. The question now was whether Moore killed to preserve a lie, or whether someone else orchestrated the opportunity and let him carry the weight. Because in cases like this, the first confession is rarely the full story. Rachel did not file the arrest warrant immediately. A confession secured under controlled conditions is powerful, but timing is leverage. Instead, she redirected resources toward reconstruction. If Moore injected Whitmore between 1 and 1:40, every variable inside that 40-minute window mattered. She requested a full digital reconstruction of Moore's phone, not just tower pings. Micro-movement telemetry. Modern devices record far more than people realize. Accelerometer shifts, gyroscopic tilt, screen activations. At 12:53 a.m., Moore's phone registered vertical movement. At 12:55, a brief screen unlock. At 12:57, the flashlight activated for 6 seconds. Rachel leaned closer. Inside the house? She asked. Likely, the analyst replied. Signal attenuation suggests interior structure. Juan? Flashlight? Wes. Why would he need that? The study lights may have been off. Rachel reviewed the crime scene photos again. When the body was discovered, the study lights were on, which meant someone turned them back on after the flashlight use. At 1:02 a.m., the phone registered a rapid series of horizontal motions. Restraint struggle, the analyst suggested. Rachel said nothing. At 1:05 a.m., there was a spike in heart rate recorded by Moore's smartwatch, elevated for approximately 3 minutes, then steady decline. At 1:12 a.m., the flashlight activated again for 4 seconds. At 1:16 a.m., the phone was placed stationary. At 1:27 a.m., it moved toward the driveway. The alarm reared at 1:43. Why the delay between 1:27 and 1:43? Rachel asked. Perhaps he remained inside. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Or someone else did. She shifted to another dataset. Whitmore's landline call log. At 12:48 a.m., an outgoing call was placed. Duration: 22 seconds. Unanswered. Recipient Laura Bennett. Rachel felt the floor beneath the case tilt slightly. Whitmore called Bennett after Moore claimed he left, which meant at 12:48, Whitmore was alive. Moore had not yet returned, and Whitmore was reaching out. Why? Rachel requested audio from Whitmore's home answering system. There was no message, but the timestamp confirmed the attempt. 12:48. Rachel mapped it. Moore leaves around midnight. Whitmore reconsiders. Calls Bennett. Then at 12:58, the alarm disarms using Greeley's credential. Moore's phone moves vertically at 12:53. Flashlight at 12:57, which means Moore was already inside before the 12:58 log. Rachel leaned back slowly. If Moore entered using Whitmore's personal code, the system should log Whitmore's credential, but it logged Greeley's, which meant the log was overwritten. She stood abruptly. Pull system integrity audit from Reeves' console, she ordered. Within an hour, results confirmed what she suspected. At 12:56 a.m., a remote administrative override altered the credential association for the next entry event. The code entered physically could have been Whitmore's, but the system reassigned it to Greeley's ID. Rachel exhaled slowly. Laura Bennett accessed Reeves' office at 12:42. She had administrative privileges while inside. She could alter credential mapping, meaning a more likely used Whitmore's personal code. But the system recorded Greeley. Bennett framed the investigator preemptively. Rachel felt clarity settle. But clarity did not absolve Moore. He still injected Whitmore. He still burned the envelope. Unless, she turned back to Moore's telemetry. The heart rate spike at 105. What happened between 105 and 112? 7 minutes. If succinylcholine was administered at approximately 106, respiratory paralysis would follow rapidly. Whitmore would be conscious but immobile. Moore would have to remain until death ensured silence. Rachel reviewed autopsy timing. Estimated time of death around 1:10 a.m. consistent. The timeline aligned with Moore's telemetry, which meant Moore injected. Bennett manipulated logs. But what about the call at 12:48? Rachel dialed Bennett again. She answered. You received a call from Whitmore at 12:48 a.m., Rachel said without introduction. Silence. Yes, Bennett replied. Why didn't you mention it? He didn't leave a message. You saw the missed call. Yes. And you didn't call back. No. Why? I assumed he changed his mind. About confessing. Yes. Rachel's voice sharpened. Or did you assume Moore returned? Silence. You manipulated the alarm log before Moore entered. Rachel continued. You reassigned Whitmore's credential to Greeley's. Bennett did not deny it. I wanted Greeley investigated, she said finally. Why? Because if Whitmore confessed, it would expose judicial weakness. And you thought blaming Greeley would preserve the narrative. Wes. Rachel felt the admission settle. You tampered with a live security system during an unfolding event. Wes. You understood someone could die. I did not anticipate murder. Rachel's voice lowered. But you created cover. Bennett inhaled sharply. I created doubt. Rachel paused. Whitmore called you at 12:48, she said quietly. Yes. Dar. What did you think he was going to say? That he was proceeding. And that terrified you? Yes. Rachel let the silence expand. Did you know Moore returned? No. But you suspected he might. Less. Rachel stepped closer to the window, watching traffic below. So you preemptively redirected suspicion. Less. Rachel turned back. You didn't kill Whitmore, she said evenly. No boo. But you attempted to control the aftermath. Yes. Rachel ended the call. She returned to Moore one final time. The alarm log was manipulated, she said calmly. Moore looked confused. Manipulated how? Your entry was reassigned to Greeley's credential. Moore blinked. So I wasn't crazy. No. He leaned back slowly. She framed him.
Less.
Moore closed his eyes briefly. Did she know I was going back? Unclear. Rachel studied him carefully. You injected him, she said. Yes. Because you believed he would expose you. Yes. But he called Bennett before you returned. Moore's eyes opened. He did? Yes. Silence. That changes things. Moore murmured. Does it? He stared at the table. If he called her, he said slowly, maybe he was reconsidering. Rachel held his gaze. Did you consider that? Moore said nothing. You assumed he would proceed. Rachel continued. So you prevented him. Moore's voice cracked for the first time. I couldn't go back. Back to what? To being defined by that case. Rachel's expression remained steady. You were acquitted, Wes, but you knew. Moore's silence was answer enough. Rachel stepped back. The structure was now clear. Whitmore planned confession. He called Bennett. Bennett panicked and manipulated logs to protect institutional image. Moore panicked and returned to silence the confession permanently. 3 people reacting to the same trigger. Only one committed murder, but one attempted obstruction. And one had once accepted financial pressure. Rachel left the room quietly. Roland would later describe it not as a whodunit, but as a convergence. Delayed justice compressing into a single night. A judge ready to correct the record. A prosecutor desperate to preserve stability. A defendant unwilling to risk retrial. Each decision stacking upon the next. Each choice narrowing the path. Rachel stood alone in the observation hallway. Moore would be charged with first-degree murder. Bennett would face obstruction and evidence tampering. Greeley would be cleared, but the Mercer case, the original crime, remained unresolved, because if fiber evidence was valid, and if Mercer knew he was guilty, then Whitmore's death was not the beginning, it was the echo. Justice had waited 32 years. It had almost surfaced, and it had been silenced at 1:10 a.m. Rachel looked down the corridor once more. The system would correct itself now, but correction is not the same as redemption, and, in this case, redemption died in a locked study. Daniel Moore's formal arrest occurred at 9:20 a.m. He did not resist. He did not request immediate counsel. He simply nodded once when the warrant was read, as if acknowledging a conclusion he had anticipated since 12:57 the night before. Rachel watched from a measured distance. Confession aligned with telemetry. Injection aligned with toxicology. Burned fragments aligned with motive. But the case was not finished, because Daniel Mercer's original trial remained unfinished business. And Whitmore's nearly delivered confession still existed in digital form. Rachel returned to the judge's study after the crime scene release. The room felt altered, not physically, but narratively. The grandfather clock had been removed for processing, the hollow behind it photographed and cataloged. She stood where Whitmore had sat, viewed the desk from his vantage point. She imagined the envelope resting in front of him, the lab report, the campaign receipt, proof that fiber evidence likely tied Moore to Elise Harmon's death, proof that political pressure influenced exclusion, proof that the acquittal may have been constructed, not earned. Rachel opened her tablet and reviewed the recovered char fragments again. Forensics had reconstructed portions digitally. The fiber confirmation page was partially legible. The routing receipt clearer. Amount circled. Date stamped 2 weeks before the acquittal. But something else emerged from enhanced imaging. A handwritten note at the bottom of the lab page. Not Whitmore's handwriting. Not Bennett's. It read, secondary sample, stored, locker, B14. Rachel's pulse slowed. Secondary sample. Stored. Not destroyed. She immediately contacted evidence archives from the original Mercer case. 32-year-old evidence storage is rarely intact. But the rail yard box from the Harmon case was still cataloged in state custody. Rachel drove personally to the facility. The storage supervisor unlocked a temperature-controlled vault. Dust-coated boxes labeled by decade-lined steel shelves. She located the Harmon case container. Seal intact. Chain of custody records dormant since acquittal. She opened it carefully. Inside were original photographs, clothing samples, and fiber bags. She examined the inventory sheet. Locker reference B14. She turned toward the evidence room wall. Locker B14 still existed. Unused for years. The supervisor retrieved the key. When the locker opened, a sealed bag sat inside. Unopened. Label handwritten. Secondary fiber control. Rachel exhaled slowly. Whitmore had retained a copy of the lab report, but the actual secondary control sample had remained in storage. Forgotten. Untouched. Untampered. She requested immediate reanalysis. Modern fiber comparison is more precise than it was 32 years ago. If the original conclusion held, the sample would confirm it definitively. 2. By evening, preliminary results returned. The secondary sample matched fibers recovered from Elise Harmon's jacket, and those fibers matched archival upholstery samples from Mercer's registered vehicle at the time of arrest. Probability margin narrowed beyond 99.9% under modern analysis. Rachel stared at the data. Moore had been acquitted, but the evidence had not been wrong. It had been excluded. Justice had not failed because of error. It had been redirected. She closed her eyes briefly. Moore killed Whitmore to avoid retrial. But the retrial was now possible regardless, because murder reopened scrutiny, and preserved evidence reopened the case. Rachel returned to the precinct. Moore sat in holding. She requested one final conversation. He agreed. You found something? He said immediately. Yes. The fibers? Yes. He nodded slowly. I figured. Did you kill Elise Harmon? Rachel asked calmly. Moore did not answer at first. Silence stretched. I was young, he said finally. That's not an answer. I made a mistake. Mistake implies accident. He swallowed. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Rachel's voice remained steady. You abducted her. He closed his eyes. Yes. You assaulted her. Silence. You killed her. Yes. The word settled heavily. And your father knew, Rachel continued.
Yes.
Intervened. Yes. Pressured Whitmore. Yes. And Whitmore excluded evidence. Yes. Rachel studied him. Did you ever believe you got away with it? No. Then why build a life? Because the system let me. Rachel absorbed that. When Whitmore reopened the case, she said quietly, did you feel guilt? Yes. Or fear? Both. Rachel leaned back. You killed him not because he was wrong 32 years ago, she said evenly, but because he was about to be right. Moore said nothing. Rachel stood. You will face charges for Whitmore's murder, she said.
Yes?
And the Harmon case will be formally reopened. He nodded. For the record, she added, justice did not expire. Moore looked at her one last time. It was delayed, he said. Yes, Rachel replied. Not erased. Laura Bennett was arrested the following morning, charged with obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. Her statement was brief. I tried to protect the institution, she said. Roland would later frame it differently. Institutions do not require protection from truth, only from exposure. Thomas Greeley was publicly cleared, his name restored. But restoration does not erase decades of quiet doubt. Rachel visited him once more. The fiber evidence was valid, she told him. He closed his eyes. I know. He killed her. Greeley nodded slowly. Then Whitmore knew too, he said.
Yes.
Too late. Yes. Greeley exhaled. Thank you, he said quietly. Rachel left without ceremony. Pooh. To the case file closed in layers. Moore formally charged with first-degree murder for Whitmore. Supplemental indictment filed in the Harmon homicide. Bennett awaiting trial for obstruction. Campaign finance review launched retroactively. Whitmore's legacy rewritten. But Rachel returned one final time to the empty study. The desk was cleared. The clock removed. The silence no longer theatrical. Just still, she stood where Whitmore had faced the weight of correction. He had waited 32 years to confront it, and he nearly succeeded. Nearly. Rachel ran her fingers lightly across the desk surface where the envelope imprint once remained. Justice is not immediate. It is not immune to influence. It is not incorruptible. But it is patient. Sometimes it waits decades. Sometimes it survives fire. Sometimes it survives confession. And sometimes it requires someone willing to reopen a file no one else wants to touch. Rachel turned toward the doorway. Outside, the city moved forward, unaware. But somewhere in evidence storage, locker B414 stood empty now. Its contents re-examined. Its silence broken. And in a holding cell down the hall, a man who once believed acquittal meant freedom now understood the difference between verdict and truth. The system corrected itself imperfectly, but it corrected, and in the quiet aftermath of a locked room death, justice, delayed for 32 years, finally arrived. The headlines framed it simply. Retired judge killed by acquitted man. Prosecutor arrested for tampering. Cold case reopened after 3 decades. But Rachel knew simplicity was a luxury afforded to people outside the room. Inside the system, the aftermath was slower, layered, uncomfortable. The district attorney's office convened an internal review board within 48 hours of Laura Bennett's arrest. Archived cases from the same election cycle were flagged. Every verdict touched by significant campaign contributions would now be re-examined. Institutional tremors do not occur loudly. They spread through memo language, through quiet meetings, through sudden retirements. Rachel sat in a conference room across from the current district attorney, who looked older than his years. This will destabilize public trust, he said. Rachel's expression did not shift. Public trust destabilized 32 years ago, she replied. We're just acknowledging it. He nodded slowly. The Mercer retrial will be symbolic, he added. It will be factual, Rachel corrected. The preserved fiber sample, revalidated under modern forensic standards, formed the cornerstone of the reopened Harmon case. But prosecutors would not rely solely on fibers. Moore's recorded mission during interrogation had extended beyond Whitmore's murder. He had confessed to abducting Elise Harmon, assaulting her, killing her. The statute of limitations did not apply to homicide. Acquittal complicated matters, but newly uncovered evidence and documented judicial interference allowed legal pathways for retrial under corruption exceptions. The system, once shielded by procedure, now used procedure to correct itself. Rachel watched the wheels move. She felt no triumph, only equilibrium. 2. Thomas Greeley testified voluntarily before the review board. He brought original notes from the Mercer investigation, yellowed pages, handwritten margins. His voice remained steady. "I believe the evidence was sufficient," he said. "I respected the court's ruling. I did not agree with it." His reputation, quietly eroded over decades by whispers of investigative overreach, began restoring itself. But reputations do not regenerate fully. They scar. Laura Bennett's arraignment unfolded under cameras. She stood straight, no visible remorse. Her attorney framed her actions as procedural misjudgment during a moment of emotional distress. But digital audit logs do not reflect emotion. They reflect intent. Rachel observed from the back of the courtroom. Bennett's eyes briefly met hers. There was no hostility, only resignation. 2. Daniel Moore's holding cell felt smaller now. Not physically, but psychologically. He requested to speak again. Rachel agreed. "You found the secondary sample," he said quietly. "Wes, you reopened it." "Wes." He nodded slowly. "I always wondered if it was still there. You knew about it." "My father mentioned backups once." "Why didn't you check?" "Because if it was gone, I could believe the lie." Rachel studied him. "And if it wasn't? Then I'd have to live with certainty." Silence lingered. "You killed Whitmore to stop exposure," she said. "Yes, but the exposure happened anyway." "Wes." He exhaled. "I should have let him send it." "Yes." Would it have mattered? Rachel considered that carefully. "For him?" she said finally. "Yes." Moore closed his eyes. "I thought I could contain it." "You contained it for 1 hour." Rachel replied evenly. "Not forever." Pope. The Harmon family was notified of the reopened prosecution. Elise Harmon's younger brother, now middle-aged, stood outside the courthouse during a press statement. "For years we were told there wasn't enough evidence," he said. "Now we're told there was." Grief matures differently than anger. It becomes quieter, sharper. Rachel did not attend the press conference. She remained at her desk reviewing the chain of custody documents from 1994. The paper trail told a different story than memory. Technicians logged fiber transfers properly. The labeling discrepancy cited during trial appeared administrative, not evidentiary. The exclusion had been discretionary, not mandatory. Whitmore's handwritten notation, review transcript discrepancy, now read less like regret and more like realization. He had known, perhaps not immediately, but eventually, and he chose to confront it, late, but intentionally. Rachel returned once more to the empty study before the estate was transferred to surviving relatives. The room was cleared now, furniture removed, walls bare. Without accolades and framed commendations, it looked ordinary, human. She stood near where the desk once rested. She imagined Whitmore dialing Bennett at 12:48, a man deciding to undo his own legacy. She imagined Moore returning, convinced confession meant destruction. She imagined Bennett at Reeves' office, manipulating logs in a quiet act of institutional preservation. 3 people making decisions within minutes of one another, each believing they were protecting something. Reputation, stability, and 1 young woman, Elise Harmon, whose name had waited 3 decades for full acknowledgement. Rachel walked toward the doorway. Her phone vibrated. Forensic lab confirmation finalized. Fiber match affirmed beyond 99.9% probability. Secondary control validated original findings. The evidence had not deteriorated. It had endured. Rachel looked back once more at the vacant space. Justice is rarely cinematic. It does not announce itself. It accumulates. Sometimes it is buried in lockers. Sometimes it is hidden behind clocks. Sometimes it survives fire. But it remains. As Rachel stepped outside, dusk settled over the property. The case would proceed through courts now. Procedural motions, appeals, public scrutiny. But the facts were stable. Moore killed Whitmore to silence a confession. Bennett tampered with logs to redirect suspicion. Whitmore excluded evidence under political pressure. And Elise Harmon's murder was no longer obscured by doubt. Roland would later narrate it plainly. This was never about a locked room. It was about a closed record. And once that record reopened, Every decision made in its shadow collapsed under weight. Rachel entered her vehicle. The city lights flickered on one by one. Another file closed. Another system corrected imperfectly. But correction, even delayed, is still correction. And somewhere inside a courtroom scheduled weeks ahead, a verdict that should have been delivered 32 years ago prepared to speak again. The retrial did not begin with spectacle. It began with paperwork, motions filed under corruption exception statutes, arguments over double jeopardy boundaries. Defense counsel attempted dismissal twice before jury selection. Both motions denied. The court ruled that documented judicial interference and suppressed material evidence created a constitutional breach significant enough to permit retrial. For the first time in 32 years, Elise Harmon's name was spoken in a courtroom without the shadow of acquittal attached to it. Rachel attended the first day of proceedings in plain clothes, seated near the back. Daniel Moore entered under escort, no longer composed, no longer calculating. He looked smaller. Age had not diminished him as much as inevitability had. The prosecution began with structure, not emotion. Fiber analysis presented under modern forensic standards. Chain of custody review establishing continuity. Digital reconstruction of the suppressed sidebar exchange. Campaign finance receipt linking Moore's father to Whitmore's election fund. Each element layered carefully. The jury listened without visible reaction. Then came the recorded interrogation. Moore's own voice admitting abduction, admitting assault, admitting killing Elise Harmon. The defense objected. The judge overruled. Rachel watched Moore's shoulders tense as his past played back into the room. When the recording ended, the silence felt dense, not theatrical, final. To Laura Bennett's separate trial unfolded concurrently. Her defense argued that log reassignment did not constitute obstruction of justice because the murder had already occurred. But forensic reconstruction demonstrated that her manipulation occurred before Moore's confirmed injection window. Her action created investigative misdirection at a critical stage. Intent was not ambiguous. Rachel testified regarding the digital audit trail. Administrative override at 12:56 a.m. Credential reassignment logged with her session key. Defense counsel pressed. Did Ms. Bennett physically enter the judge's residence? No. Did she administer the fatal injection? No. Then how did her action cause death? Rachel answered evenly. It did not cause death. It obstructed clarity. Clarity in a murder investigation is oxygen. Remove it and the narrative suffocates. Ting Thomas Greeley attended both trials quietly. No press statements, no interviews. When called to testify in the retrial, he spoke without embellishment. The fibers matched, he said. They match then? They match now. He did not look at Moore while saying it. Two closing arguments in the Harmon retrial were restrained. The prosecution avoided rhetoric. They focused on sequence. Elise Harmon abducted. Fibers transferred. Body recovered. Evidence suppressed. Confession recorded. Correction initiated. Defense attempted to frame Moore's interrogation as coercive under psychological pressure. The recording contradicted that claim. Rachel's questioning had been measured, direct, non-confrontational. The jury deliberated less than 6 hours. Verdict guilty. First-degree murder. No audible reaction from Moore. He stared forward as if the word had been inevitable. Sentencing followed weeks later. Life imprisonment without parole eligibility. Rachel did not attend sentencing. She received the notification electronically. Justice, once delayed for 3 decades, concluded in a single line of text. Laura Bennett's trial concluded shortly after. Conviction on obstruction and evidence tampering. Disbarment proceedings initiated immediately. Her final statement before sentencing was brief. I believed I was preserving the integrity of the system. The judge's response was equally brief. Integrity cannot be preserved through concealment. Sentence 5 years. The courtroom remained quiet. Institutional correction rarely draws applause. To Judge Harold Whitmore's legacy was formally amended in public record. A posthumous judicial review panel acknowledged improper exclusion influenced by campaign pressure. His portrait was removed from the courthouse corridor and relocated to a private archive pending further review. Rachel did not attend that ceremony either. She returned instead to evidence storage, Locker B14 now empty. Catalog updated. Chain of custody amended. The space looked ordinary, unremarkable. But that locker had carried truth longer than any witness. She stood there briefly. Not out of sentiment, but acknowledgement. 2 weeks later, the Harmon family requested a private meeting. Rachel agreed. Elise Harmon's brother spoke first. For years we doubted ourselves, he said. We thought maybe the system was right. Rachel listened. It wasn't right, she said. It is now, he replied. She did not respond immediately. Now it's accurate, she said finally. Accuracy is not the same as healing, but it is necessary. Touched back at her desk, Rachel finalized the composite case file. Whitmore homicide closed. More convictions secured. Harmon retrial concluded. Bennett obstruction adjudicated. Greeley cleared. The document stack felt heavier than its paper weight suggested. Rowland would later narrate the conclusion without flourish. This was never about a locked study. It was about accumulated silence. Silence purchased through campaign contributions. Silence preserved through discretionary rulings. Silence defended through digital manipulation. And silence broken by one decision, a judge choosing, finally, to correct the record. Rachel reviewed Whitmore's final handwritten note one last time. Review transcript discrepancy, 3 words that unraveled 32 years. She closed the file. Outside, the city continued its steady movement. No monuments erected, no parades, just corrected records. Sometimes justice is dramatic, sometimes it is procedural, and sometimes it is simply the refusal to let a closed file remain closed. Rachel turned off her desk lamp. Another case complete, not because it was clean, but because it was true. The public memory of the case began fading within weeks. New headlines replaced old ones. Political commentary shifted elsewhere. But inside the archived system, the Mercer Harmon file no longer sat dormant. It carried annotations now. Judicial interference confirmed. Evidence revalidated. Conviction entered. Correction logged. Rachel stood in the records division as the final digital stamp was applied. Status closed corrected. The word corrected felt deliberate. Not reversed. Not erased. Corrected. Because Elise Harmon could not be restored. Whitmore could not amend his decision in life, and Moore's decades of freedom could not be reclaimed. But the record could be adjusted to reflect truth, and sometimes that is the only repair available. 2 months later, Rachel received a sealed envelope delivered through internal mail. Return address, Thomas Greeley. Inside was a single page, a copy of the original fiber analysis report, preserved in his personal archive. At the bottom, he had written a short note. I kept this to remind myself that evidence does not lose validity simply because it is ignored. No signature beyond his name. Rachel placed the page inside the finalized case binder. Evidence had endured. Memory had endured. And now accountability had endured. Laura Bennett began serving her sentence quietly. Her appeals filed but unlikely to succeed. Moore entered long-term incarceration classification. No media interviews, no statements. The Harmon family visited the cemetery for the first time in years without protest signs or unresolved questions. Closure is not peace, but it is stability. Rachel returned once more to the now sold Whitmore estate before its renovation began. Construction crews were preparing to strip the interior. The study walls were already bare, floorboards exposed in sections. The space where the grandfather clock once stood was marked with painter's tape. Rachel stood there briefly. The room no longer felt heavy. It felt transitional. Whitmore had made a decision too late. Moore had made a decision too quickly. Bennett had made a decision too defensively. Each believed they were controlling consequences. But consequence, once set in motion, rarely negotiates. Rachel stepped outside as dusk settled. She did not look back this time. At her desk later that evening, she opened the unresolved file that had followed her for years. Her own cold case. Different victims. Different decade. No confession waiting. No preserved fiber sample labeled in a forgotten locker. Just questions. She stared at it for a moment. Then she began reading again. Because that is how correction begins. With reopening. Rowland would later conclude the episode without flourish. The locked room was never the mystery. The mystery was delay. Delay in confronting influence. Delay in admitting error. delay in accepting that justice does not expire simply because time passes. A judge nearly corrected his record. A defendant attempted to silence that correction. A prosecutor tried to preserve institutional image. But the system, imperfect and pressured, eventually recalibrated. Not because it was flawless, but because someone insisted on examining the discrepancy. 32 years, one envelope, one concealed sample, one fatal injection, and a record that refused to remain closed. Rachel switched off her monitor. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the river. Inside, the Mercer Harmon file rested complete, not redeemed, not celebrated, corrected, and in the quiet hum of a precinct settling into night, correction was enough. If this case stayed with you, subscribe for more investigations where every detail counts. And in the comments, tell me, what was the moment you knew something didn't add up?